For years, he was presented as the most uncompromising critic of the post-conciliar establishment. For years, he spoke of a crisis so deep that many Catholics struggled even to follow his conclusions. He denounced corruption. He denounced doctrinal confusion. He denounced what he called a systematic effort to transform the Church from within. Then something happened that almost nobody expected. The same man who had spent years questioning the legitimacy of Pope Francis publicly addressed Leo XIV with the traditional title reserved for the Roman pontiff. Your Holiness. Two words that have shaken parts of the traditional Catholic world more than 100 theological debates. Because those words force a question that many people were not prepared to ask. What changed? And perhaps more importantly, what did not change? By the end of this video, you will understand why the publication of Archbishop Carlo Maria Viganò's private letter to Leo XIV may become one of the most significant developments of this pontificate. Not because of what it says about the Pope, but because of what it reveals about the future of traditional Catholic resistance. Let's begin with the facts. On June 18, 2026, Archbishop Carlo Maria Viganò made public a letter he had sent months earlier to Pope Leo XIV. The letter itself was dated January 2026. According to Vigano, it was transmitted through official Vatican channels. It received no reply, no acknowledgement, no audience, no response. For months, the letter remained private. Then, suddenly, it appeared in full. And what Catholics discovered inside was astonishing. To understand why, we must understand who Vigano is. Because Archbishop Carlo Maria Viganò is not simply another retired bishop expressing concerns. For decades, he occupied some of the highest positions in the Church. Ordained in 1968, entering the diplomatic service of the Holy See in 1973, serving in Nigeria, serving in the Secretariat of State, serving as Secretary General of the Governorate of Vatican City, and eventually serving as Apostolic Nuncio to the United States. This is not a man who observed the Vatican from the outside. He lived inside it. He worked inside it. He understood how it functioned. And that is precisely why his testimony regarding Theodore McCarrick in 2018 created such an earthquake. For the first time, a senior Vatican diplomat publicly accused church authorities of ignoring warnings regarding one of the most powerful cardinals in America. The consequences were immediate. Vigano became a hero to some, a villain to others, but nobody could ignore him. From that moment forward, his criticism expanded beyond the McCarrick affair. He began speaking about doctrinal confusion, about ecclesiastical corruption, about the Second Vatican Council, about the direction of the Church itself. Year after year, his language became stronger. Year after year, his isolation grew, until finally, the conflict reached its climax. On July 5, 2024, the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith declared him guilty of schism. The penalty was excommunication. The sentence was public. The rupture appeared complete. Most observers assumed the story was over. They were wrong, because now comes the surprising part. The man officially declared excommunicated. The man accused of schism. The man who spent years questioning papal legitimacy has now written directly to Leo XIV. Not as an enemy, not as an outsider, not as a revolutionary, but as someone appealing to the Pope. Pause for a moment and consider what that means, because words matter, especially in the Church, especially when written by an archbishop who spent years choosing every word with extraordinary precision. Vigano did not write Mr. Prevost. He did not write Bishop of Rome. He did not write the man elected in the conclave. He wrote Your Holiness. That title changes the entire conversation, and immediately a question emerges. Does Vigano now recognize Leo XIV as Pope? The answer appears obvious, yet the implications are enormous. because many of Vigano's most dedicated supporters followed him precisely because they believed the crisis had reached such depths that normal categories no longer applied. Now, the same Archbishop appears to be acting within those very categories, not abandoning his criticisms, not retracting his concerns, but addressing them to the Pope himself. And that distinction is crucial. The letter is not an act of surrender, far from it. In fact, the letter contains some of the strongest criticisms Vigano has ever directed toward the current trajectory of the Church. He defends his record. He recounts decades of service. He insists that he was punished for exposing corruption rather than committing wrongdoing. He rejects the accusation of schism, and he argues that his opposition arose from fidelity to the faith rather than rebellion against authority. This is where the letter becomes fascinating, because Vigano is simultaneously doing two things. He is challenging the direction of the Church, and he is appealing to the authority of the Pope. Those two realities appear contradictory, yet in his mind they are perfectly compatible. He presents himself not as someone attacking the Church, but as someone defending it. Not as someone rejecting the papacy, but as someone asking the Pope to exercise it. That distinction may become one of the most important themes of the coming months, because it reflects a broader struggle unfolding throughout the traditional Catholic world. A struggle over strategy, a struggle over identity, a struggle over how to respond to crisis. Some believe the answer is separation. Others believe the answer is resistance from within. Vigano's letter suggests he may now be leaning toward the second approach, and that changes everything. Because if even Vigano is knocking on the Pope's door rather than walking away from it, the implications reach far beyond one man. But there is another revelation hidden inside the letter, one that has attracted even more attention. A detail that remained completely unknown until now, a detail involving Cardinal Raymond Burke. For years, Cardinal Burke has occupied a unique position within the Church, respected by traditional Catholics, feared by progressives, yet consistently remaining within official structures, careful, measured, precise. Now, Vigano reveals something remarkable. According to the letter, Cardinal Burke advised him to remain hidden, to withdraw from public visibility, to avoid exposing himself unnecessarily. Think about that image. One of the most famous cardinals in the world, advising one of the most controversial archbishops in the world to disappear from sight. Not forever, not in surrender, but in prudence. That revelation tells us something important. It tells us that many of the tensions we see publicly are only a fraction of what exists privately. Because beneath the headlines lies another reality. Conversations, warnings, counsel, appeals, disagreements, efforts to avoid deeper ruptures. And perhaps Cardinal Burke's advice belongs to that hidden world, the world we rarely see, the world where decisions are made long before they become public. Yet the existence of that advice raises another question. Why publish the letter now? Why wait months? Why release it at this specific moment? The timing is impossible to ignore, because the Church currently finds itself facing multiple tensions simultaneously. The synodal process continues. Questions regarding doctrine continue. The SSPX consecrations approach. Traditional Catholics remain divided over strategy. And now, suddenly, Vigano emerges from silence with a direct appeal to Leo XIV. Nothing about this timing appears accidental. Which brings us to the deepest question of all. What exactly is Vigano hoping to achieve? Because the letter is not merely defensive. It is not merely autobiographical. It is a request for dialogue, a request for an audience, a request to be heard. And that request transforms the entire meaning of the document. For years, Vigano stood as a symbol of confrontation. Now he appears as a man asking for a conversation. Not because his concerns disappeared, not because his convictions changed, but perhaps because he understands that the future of traditional Catholicism cannot be built entirely on opposition. The future requires something else, something more difficult, the willingness to speak and the willingness to listen. Whether Leo XIV responds remains unknown, but the publication of this letter has already changed the discussion, because the most radical critic of recent years has now made a move that few expected. He has knocked on the Pope's door, and that raises a question whose answer could reshape the entire traditional Catholic landscape. What happens if the door opens? If the door opens, the consequences will reach far beyond Archbishop Carlo Maria Viganò. Because this story is no longer simply about one man. It is about an entire segment of the Catholic world that increasingly feels unheard. For years, traditional Catholics have watched events unfold with growing concern. The restrictions of Traditionis Custodes, the debates surrounding synodality, the controversies over fiducia supplicans, the theological discussions that once belonged to academic journals, suddenly becoming questions discussed at dinner tables, parish halls, and family rosaries. Many Catholics who never considered themselves activists found themselves asking questions they never expected to ask. And through all those years, one figure after another emerged as a symbol of resistance. Cardinal Burke, Bishop Schneider, Bishop Strickland, and perhaps most controversial of all, Archbishop Vigano. Yet there has always been a difference between Vigano and the others. Burke remained inside the system. Schneider remained inside the system. Strickland remained inside the system even after his removal from office. Vigano appeared to move beyond it. That is why this letter matters, because the man who seemed furthest away now appears to be moving closer. Not necessarily in agreement, not necessarily in reconciliation, but in engagement. And engagement changes the landscape. Think about what Vigano could have done. He could have continued speaking only to those who already agree with him. He could have continued issuing statements directed exclusively toward his own supporters. He could have continued treating Rome as a distant institution beyond correction. Instead, he chose another path. He wrote directly to Leo XIV. That choice carries symbolic weight, because symbols matter in the life of the Church. The Church itself is built upon symbols. Water, oil, bread, wine, hands laid upon heads, knees bent in prayer, and now another symbol enters the story. A letter. A letter traveling from a hidden archbishop to the supreme pontiff. A letter asking not for victory, but for a hearing. The more one reflects on it, the more unusual it becomes. Because history is full of church disputes. History is full of excommunications. History is full of condemnations. But some of the greatest reconciliations began exactly this way. Not with agreements, not with compromises, but with conversations. Saint Catherine of Siena wrote to popes. Saint Athanasius endured exile while appealing to legitimate authority. Even Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre himself spent years seeking dialogue before the dramatic events of 1988. The Church has always lived through tension between authority and conscience, between obedience and conviction, between unity and truth. And that is precisely why Vigano's letter cannot be reduced to a political gesture. At its heart lies a profoundly ecclesial question. Can disagreements still be heard inside the Church? Not celebrated, not automatically accepted, simply heard. Because if dialogue becomes impossible, every disagreement becomes a rupture, and every rupture becomes permanent. That is a path the Church has tried to avoid for 2,000 years. This is why the silence surrounding the letter is becoming increasingly significant. Weeks have passed. Months have passed. No response, no audience, no acknowledgement. At least none made public. And silence always has two possible meanings. The first possibility is indifference. The second is deliberation. History teaches us not to confuse the two. Some of the most important decisions in the Church were preceded by long periods of silence. Popes often move slowly. Institutions often move slowly, sometimes frustratingly slowly. But slowness itself does not reveal intention. The question therefore remains open. Has Leo XIV ignored the letter? Or is he considering what to do with it? No one outside the Vatican can answer that question, but everyone can observe the larger pattern. Because Vigano is not the only one waiting. The SSPX has waited. Traditional communities have waited. Catholics concerned about synodality have waited. Catholics asking for doctrinal clarity have waited. The feeling of waiting itself has become part of the story. And perhaps that is why the publication of the letter resonated so strongly. Many people saw in it their own experience, the experience of speaking and hearing no answer, the experience of asking questions and receiving silence, the experience of remaining loyal while feeling increasingly distant from those entrusted with leadership. Whether that perception is justified or not is a separate discussion. What matters is that it exists, and leaders ignore perceptions at their own risk. There is another dimension that deserves attention. Vigano repeatedly frames his struggle not as a personal conflict, but as a conflict over truth. Critics will dispute his conclusions. Supporters will defend them. But both sides must acknowledge something. He genuinely believes he is acting for the good of the Church. That conviction runs through every line of the letter. He does not write like a man seeking rehabilitation. He writes like a man seeking vindication. There is a difference. Rehabilitation asks for acceptance. Vindication asks for recognition that one's warnings were justified. And that distinction may explain why the letter has generated such intense reactions. Because Vigano is not retreating from his previous criticisms. He is bringing them directly before the Pope. That requires courage, whether one agrees with him or not. It also requires a certain hope, because people do not request audiences when they believe conversation is impossible. They request audiences when they believe something might still change. And perhaps that is the most surprising aspect of all: hope. After years of conflict, after years of accusations, after excommunication, after isolation, after hiding from public life, the existence of this letter suggests that Vigano still believes dialogue is possible. Otherwise, he would never have written it. This brings us back to Cardinal Burke, because Burke's reported advice now appears in a new light. Perhaps hiding was never meant to be permanent. Perhaps it was meant to create distance, time, perspective, the kind of space necessary before another attempt could be made. If so, then the publication of the letter may represent the next stage of that process. Not surrender, not escalation, but re-engagement. And that possibility alone changes the discussion. For years, traditional Catholic debates have often revolved around a simple question: stay or leave, fight or separate, obey or resist. The letter suggests a different possibility: remain, speak, appeal, persist. That approach may not satisfy everyone. Some will consider it too conciliatory. Others will consider it too confrontational. But it belongs to a long Catholic tradition. The tradition of appealing to authority while challenging authority. The tradition of saints who spoke difficult truths without abandoning the Church. The tradition of believing that reform is possible because Christ remains the head of his Church. Which leads us to the final and perhaps most important question: what happens next? No one knows. Leo XIV may never respond publicly. An audience may never occur. The letter may simply disappear into the archives. That is possible. But another possibility exists. The possibility that this letter becomes the beginning of something larger. A conversation, a clarification, a reassessment, a reopening of questions many assumed were permanently settled. History often turns on moments that seem insignificant at first. A meeting, A letter. A conversation behind closed doors. Years later, people look back and realize everything changed there. We do not yet know whether this letter belongs to that category. But we do know this: the most outspoken critic of the previous pontificate has now addressed Leo XIV as Pope. He has asked to be heard. He has appealed rather than withdrawn. And by doing so, he has placed the next move in someone else's hands. The letter has been written. The appeal has been made. The door has been knocked upon. Now everyone waits to see whether it will open. What do you think? If you enjoyed this video, comment Amen. God bless you.